License and registration.
I'm reaching for my wallet in the console, officer.
Hey, slow down. Don't start digging around.
Just get my identification.
Where are you coming from tonight?
Work.
What kind of work?
I'm a federal agent.
Yeah, sure you are.
Officer, may I ask the reason for
I'll
the
ask the questions. You people always have some kind of story when we stop
I'm
you
just
around here.
driving home.
Step out of the vehicle, Hollister.
Don't move.
Okay, keep your hands exactly where they are.
My hands on the vehicle, officer. I'm cooperating.
Spread your feet wider.
There's no reason for this level of force.
I decide what's necessary. You said
I've
you're a
already
federal
shown you my
agent?
credentials.
The body camera timestamp read 11:41 p.m. when Officer Trent Hollister activated his patrol lights behind a dark gray sedan traveling along a quiet stretch of road just outside Upper Marlboro in Prince George's County. Within minutes, Hollister had his hand resting near his weapon, shouting commands at the driver like he was dealing with a dangerous suspect. What Hollister didn't know in that moment was that the man he had just pulled over wasn't an ordinary driver. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you were watching from and make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you don't want to miss. Officer Trent Hollister was 39 years old and had spent just over 11 years working patrol in Prince George's County. Among some of the officers in the department, Hollister had a reputation for being aggressive during traffic stops. Several drivers had filed complaints over the years, claiming he escalated situations unnecessarily, especially when dealing with people he believed didn't belong in certain neighborhoods. Despite the complaints, Hollister remained on patrol. Supervisors had warned him about his conduct more than once, but he was known for brushing those warnings aside and trusting what he called his street instincts. That night he was assigned to a quiet patrol zone near Upper Marlboro. It was the kind of area where officers often pulled over drivers late at night for minor traffic violations. When Hollister noticed the gray sedan passing through the area, something about it immediately caught his attention. He pulled out behind the vehicle and began following it for several seconds. Then he switched on his lights. The driver of the sedan was Darius Caldwell, a 38-year-old federal agent who had spent the last 14 years working in federal law enforcement. Caldwell had built a reputation among his colleagues for staying calm under pressure and handling difficult situations without escalating them. That night, he had just finished a long shift working out of a federal office closer to Washington, D.C. All he wanted to do was get home. When the patrol lights appeared in his rearview mirror, Caldwell slowed his vehicle and pulled carefully onto the shoulder of the road. The area was quiet. Street lights reflected off the hood of the car while the red and blue lights from Hollister's cruiser flashed across the empty roadway. Caldwell placed both hands on the steering wheel where they were clearly visible. Inside the patrol car behind him, Hollister watched for a few seconds before stepping out. He adjusted the body camera attached to the front of his vest and began walking toward the driver's side window. The flashing lights reflected across the side of the sedan as he approached. Caldwell rolled the window down before Hollister even reached the door. "Good evening, officer," Caldwell said calmly. Hollister didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, he leaned slightly toward the window and spoke in a sharp tone. "License and registration." Caldwell nodded. "Yes, sir." He slowly reached toward the center console. "I'm grabbing my wallet from the console," Caldwell said, making sure his movements were slow and visible. Hollister immediately raised his voice. "Just keep your hands where I can see them." "They are," Caldwell replied, calmly. "Then move slower." Caldwell handed over his driver's license and registration. Hollister glanced down at the license briefly before looking back at him. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked. "Work." "What kind of work?" "I'm a federal agent," Caldwell answered. Hollister stared at him for a moment. Then he gave a short laugh. "Yeah, all right." He looked again at the license. "Step out of the vehicle." Caldwell remained calm. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being asked to step out?" "I didn't ask," Hollister said, his voice suddenly louder. "I told you to step out of the vehicle." Caldwell slowly opened the door and stepped onto the side of the road. Traffic moved slowly through the opposite lane as the patrol lights continued flashing. Hollister walked around the front of the sedan, watching Caldwell closely. "You said you're a federal agent?" Hollister asked. "Yes, sir." "What agency?" "I can explain that, but may I ask why I was stopped?" Hollister ignored the question. "You people always have some kind of story," he said. Caldwell looked at him carefully but kept his voice steady. "I'm just heading home." Hollister shook his head slightly. "Yeah, we'll see about that." He turned and spoke into the radio attached to his shoulder. "Dispatch, run a license. Name is Caldwell, Darius." A few seconds later, the dispatcher responded that the request was being processed. Caldwell stood beside his vehicle, waiting quietly. Hollister stepped closer again, clearly studying him. "You nervous?" the officer asked. "No, you should be." Caldwell didn't react. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said. Hollister's tone turned even sharper. "Don't start telling me what you did or didn't do." He pointed toward the rear of the sedan. "Turn around and put your hands on the car." Caldwell hesitated briefly. "Officer, am I being detained?" "I said, put your hands on the car." The command was loud enough that a passing driver slowed down while going by. Caldwell slowly turned and placed both hands on the trunk of the sedan. Hollister stepped in close behind him. "You know," Hollister said quietly, "guys like you always act calm until we start checking things out." Caldwell didn't respond. Hollister began patting him roughly, pressing him harder against the car than necessary. He reached into Caldwell's jacket and pulled out a small leather wallet. "What's this?" Hollister asked. "That's my credential wallet," Caldwell said. Hollister opened it briefly, barely glancing at what was inside before snapping it shut. "Uh-huh." Instead of giving it back, he kept it in his hand. At that moment, the police radio crackled again. Dispatch's voice came through. "Unit 24, we're still verifying the license. Stand by." Hollister smirked. "Oh, we're going to verify it," he said. He suddenly grabbed Caldwell's arm and pushed him harder against the trunk of the car. "Spread your feet wider." Caldwell remained calm, despite the force. "Officer, there's no need for this. I decide what's needed." Hollister reached down toward the handcuffs attached to his belt. The metal cuffs reflected the flashing patrol lights as he pulled them free, and just as Hollister began positioning Caldwell's arms to place the cuffs on him, another patrol car turned onto the road and pulled in behind them. The second patrol vehicle rolled to a stop behind Officer Trent Hollister's cruiser, its headlights cutting through the flashing red and blue lights already lighting the side of the road. Officer Wade Carver stepped out of the vehicle and quickly took in the scene in front of him. Darius Caldwell was pressed against the trunk of his sedan with his hands spread wide across the metal surface. Officer Trent Hollister stood behind him, gripping his arm and holding a pair of handcuffs. Carver walked closer. "What's going on?" he asked. Hollister didn't loosen his grip on Caldwell. "Guy says he's some kind of federal agent, driving around out here acting like he owns the place." Carver looked at Caldwell briefly. Caldwell remained calm despite the pressure being forced against his back. "I told the officer already, I work in federal law enforcement." Hollister immediately tightened his grip on Caldwell's arm. "Don't start talking unless I tell you to," Hollister snapped. Carver stood a few feet away, watching. "What'd you stop him for?" Carver asked. "Suspicious driving," Hollister replied. Caldwell spoke again, still calm. "Officer, I asked already. What law did I break?" Hollister leaned closer to Caldwell's ear. "You're getting real comfortable asking questions," Hollister said quietly. Then he raised his voice. "Hands flat on the car." "They already are," Caldwell replied. Hollister pushed him harder against the car. "I said flat." The metal of the car creaked slightly as Caldwell's weight was forced forward. Carver crossed his arms and watched. "Did dispatch run him yet?" Hollister asked. "Still waiting." Caldwell turned his head slightly. "Officer, I'd like to show you my credentials." Hollister immediately shook his head. "You've shown me enough already." "You barely looked at them," Hollister grabbed Caldwell's shoulder and forced him fully against the car. "You don't tell me what I did or didn't look at." Carver stepped closer now, standing on Caldwell's other side. "Let me see the wallet." Carver tossed the small leather credential wallet toward him. Carver opened it and glanced inside. He paused for a moment. "What is this?" Carver asked. "Probably some fake badge he bought online," Hollister said. Carver kept looking at it. Caldwell spoke again, calmly. "It's not fake." Hollister ignored him. "Spread your feet wider," Hollister ordered again. Caldwell slowly moved his feet further apart. Hollister kicked one of his shoes slightly to widen the stance even more. "That's better." Carver closed the credential wallet but didn't hand it back yet. "You said you're federal?" Carver asked Caldwell. "Yes. What agency?" "I can explain that if the officer would allow me to retrieve my ID properly." Hollister stepped closer again. "You're not retrieving anything." He lifted the handcuffs slightly. "You're being detained until we figure out what you're doing out here." Caldwell kept his voice steady. "I'm driving home." "From where?" Hollister asked. "Work. You already said that," Hollister replied. Caldwell took a slow breath. "From my office in Washington." Hollister laughed again. "Oh, Washington now." Carver glanced at Hollister. "You want me to search the car?" Carver asked. "Yeah," Hollister said immediately. He pressed Caldwell harder into the vehicle again. "Don't move." Carver walked toward the driver's side door of the sedan. Caldwell spoke again. "Officer, you don't have probable cause to search my vehicle." Hollister raised his voice immediately. "You don't get to decide that." "I know my rights," Caldwell replied calmly. Hollister leaned closer again, his tone now openly hostile. "Yeah, you people always say that." Carver paused for a moment by the driver's door. "You sure about this?" Carver asked. Hollister answered without hesitation. "Positive." Carver pulled the door open and looked inside the car. The interior was clean. A work bag sat on the passenger seat. Carver opened the bag and began looking through it. Behind him, Hollister kept Caldwell pinned to the trunk. "You picked the wrong neighborhood to be driving around tonight," muttered Hollister. "I live 10 minutes from here," Caldwell said. Hollister shook his head. "Sure you do." At that moment the radio crackled again. Dispatcher Elaine Mercer's voice came through clearly. "Unit 24, license check on Caldwell is still pending verification. Stand by." Hollister pressed the radio button on his shoulder. "Yeah, we're standing by." He released the radio and looked back at Caldwell. "You're awfully calm for someone being detained." Caldwell didn't react. "I've dealt with situations like this before," he said. "Oh, I bet you have," Hollister replied. A few seconds later, Carver returned from the vehicle holding something in his hand. It was a black identification holder he had found inside Caldwell's work bag. "Hey, Hollister," Carver said. Hollister looked over. "What?" Carver held up the holder. "This was inside the bag." Hollister looked annoyed. "What is it?" Carver opened it slightly. For the first time, the expression on his face changed. "Hollister." "What?" Hollister asked again. Carver looked back at the ID inside the holder. Then he looked at Caldwell. "You might want to look at this." Hollister stepped closer. "What now?" Carver held the ID where Hollister could see it. The badge inside reflected the flashing patrol lights. For a moment, Hollister didn't say anything. Then Caldwell spoke calmly from against the trunk of the car. "I told you I was a federal agent." Officer Trent Hollister stared at the badge for a moment, the flashing patrol lights reflecting across the metal surface. For the first time since the stop began, he didn't immediately speak. Officer Wade Carver kept the identification holder open in his hand. "You see that?" Carver asked quietly. Hollister's expression tightened. "Let me see it." Carver handed it over. Hollister looked at the badge more closely now. The identification card inside clearly displayed the name Darius Caldwell, along with federal credentials. But Hollister still didn't remove his hand from Caldwell's arm. Caldwell remained pressed against the trunk of his car. "I told you already, I work in federal law enforcement." Hollister snapped the holder shut and looked at Carver. "You think showing a badge is going to change something?" Carver frowned slightly. "It looks real to me." Hollister ignored that comment and pressed the radio button on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24. A few seconds passed before dispatcher Elaine Mercer answered. "Go ahead, Unit 24. "I need verification on a possible federal credential," Hollister said. "Stand by," Mercer replied. Hollister released the radio and looked back at Caldwell. "You think showing a badge is going to change something?" Caldwell didn't move. "It should have changed the situation about 10 minutes ago." Hollister's grip tightened again. "You're still being detained until we verify everything." Carver shifted slightly beside them. "You might want to ease up a bit," Carver said quietly. Hollister shot him a quick look. "I've got it under control." Caldwell spoke again. "Officer, you've searched my car without probable cause, and you're detaining me without explanation." Hollister leaned closer to him. "You don't get to lecture me about the law." Before Caldwell could respond, the police radio crackled again. Dispatcher Mercer's voice returned. "Unit 24, we're running the federal ID through verification now. Stand by." Carver crossed his arms while they waited. The road remained quiet except for the flashing lights and the low sound of passing traffic. A few seconds later, another vehicle slowed slightly as it drove past the scene. Caldwell remained calm. Hollister, however, looked increasingly irritated. "You federal guys always think you're above everyone else," Hollister muttered. Caldwell answered calmly, "No, I just expect to be treated according to the law." Carver looked between the two men but didn't say anything. Then the radio crackled again. "Unit 27? Hollister immediately grabbed the radio. "Go ahead." There was a brief pause before dispatcher Mercer continued. "Verification confirmed. The identity belongs to Darius Caldwell, active federal law enforcement agent." The words hung in the air for a moment. Carver slowly exhaled. Hollister didn't respond right away. Dispatcher Mercer continued. "Do you need additional assistance on the stop?" Hollister finally pressed the radio. "Negative." He released the button. For several seconds, no one spoke. Carver looked at Caldwell again. "You said federal agent." "Yes." "What agency?" Carver asked. Caldwell turned his head slightly. "I'd prefer to explain that once I'm no longer being held against my car." Carver looked toward Hollister. Hollister still hadn't moved. The handcuffs were still hanging loosely from his hand. Caldwell finally spoke again. "Officer Hollister, dispatch just confirmed my identity." Hollister's jaw tightened. "You're still being detained." Carver was surprised. "For what?" he asked. Hollister didn't answer him. Instead, he stepped around to face Caldwell. "Turn around." Caldwell slowly turned to face him. The flashing lights from the patrol cars illuminated both of their faces. For the first time since the stop began, Hollister seemed unsure of what to do next. Caldwell remained completely calm. "Officer," Caldwell said evenly, "you've pushed me against my car, searched my vehicle, and detained me without explaining the reason for the stop." Hollister didn't respond. Carver spoke up. "Maybe we should call a supervisor." Hollister looked annoyed. "We don't need a supervisor." Caldwell spoke again. "I think that would be a good idea." Carver nodded slightly. "I'll call it in." Before Hollister could stop him, Carver pressed the radio. "Dispatch, Unit 27 requesting a supervisor on scene." Dispatcher Mercer responded almost immediately. "Copy that, Unit 27. Supervisor en route." Hollister looked frustrated now. "This isn't necessary," he said. Caldwell looked directly at him. "It became necessary the moment you put your hands on me without justification." Carver handed the credential holder back to Caldwell. "Here," Carver said quietly. Caldwell took it and placed it back in his jacket pocket. Hollister paced a few steps away from the car, clearly irritated. A few minutes later, the headlights of another patrol vehicle appeared down the road. The vehicle pulled in behind the other two cruisers. The driver's door opened, and Sergeant Nolan Briggs stepped out. Briggs had more than 20 years in law enforcement and was known for keeping situations under control when things started going wrong. He walked toward the group slowly, observing the scene before saying anything. "What's going on here?" Carver answered first. "Traffic stop turned into a detention." Briggs looked at Caldwell, then at Hollister. "Who's the driver?" "That's Mr. Caldwell," Carver said. "And the issue?" Carver hesitated briefly. "He's a federal agent." Briggs turned toward Hollister. "A federal agent?" Hollister crossed his arms. "That's what dispatch says." Briggs looked back at Caldwell. Then he looked again at Hollister. For a moment, the sergeant didn't say anything. Finally, he spoke. "Hollister." His voice was calm but serious. "Do you want to explain why a confirmed federal agent was just detained and searched on the side of the road?"
"Hollister," Briggs repeated, his voice steady. "Why was a confirmed federal agent detained and searched during a traffic stop?" Hollister shifted his weight slightly but didn't answer immediately. "He was acting suspicious," Hollister finally said. Briggs glanced toward Darius Caldwell, who was now standing beside his vehicle with his hands down. "What kind of suspicious behavior?" Briggs asked. Hollister hesitated again. "He claimed he was federal," Hollister said. Caldwell spoke calmly. "I didn't claim anything. I told him exactly what I do and offered to show my credentials." Briggs turned toward Caldwell. "Did you present identification?" "Yes," Caldwell replied. "He looked at it briefly and continued the detention." Officer Wade Carver stood a few feet away, clearly uncomfortable. Briggs looked back at Hollister. "Did you verify the ID before escalating the stop?" Hollister didn't answer. Briggs's voice became firmer. "Hollister." Hollister finally responded, "I called it in." Carver spoke quietly. "That was after the search." Briggs looked at him. "You searched the vehicle?" Carver nodded slightly. "Hollister instructed me to." Briggs slowly turned back toward Hollister. "You ordered a vehicle search before the identification was verified?" Hollister crossed his arms. "I had reason to believe something wasn't right." Caldwell spoke again, still calm. "With respect, Sergeant, I asked multiple times why I was being detained. I never received an explanation." Briggs looked directly at him. "Did the officer give you a reason for the stop at any point?" "No," Caldwell answered. The sergeant let out a slow breath. Traffic moved quietly in the distance, while the flashing lights continued flashing across the road. Briggs looked back at Hollister. "Did you inform him of the reason for the stop?" Hollister's jaw tightened. "I was still investigating." Briggs didn't respond for a moment. Then he stepped slightly closer. "Were handcuffs applied?" "No," Hollister said. "But he attempted to," Caldwell added. Carver nodded slightly. Briggs looked at Hollister again. "Hollister, step aside with me." The two officers walked a short distance away from the vehicles. Their voices were lower now, but Caldwell could still hear parts of the conversation. "You escalated that stop way too quickly," Briggs said. "I was doing my job," Hollister replied. Briggs shook his head. "You had a driver cooperating, providing identification, and telling you he was federal law enforcement." Hollister didn't respond. Briggs continued, "And now dispatch confirms he is exactly who he said he was." After another moment, Briggs walked back toward Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "I apologize for how this stop was handled." Caldwell nodded once. "I appreciate that." Briggs continued, "You are free to leave." Caldwell looked at him for a moment. "Sergeant, this situation didn't start with a misunderstanding." Briggs didn't interrupt. Caldwell continued calmly, "I complied with every instruction. I identified myself. I asked simple questions. The response I received was force and hostility." Briggs nodded slightly. "I understand." Caldwell glanced briefly toward Hollister, who was standing near his cruiser. "This kind of behavior damages public trust," Caldwell said. Briggs didn't disagree. "You're right," the sergeant replied. Caldwell opened his car door but paused before getting in. "I'll also be requesting the body camera footage from tonight." Briggs nodded again. "That's your right." Caldwell got into the vehicle and started the engine. The flashing lights reflected across the hood as he slowly pulled back onto the road and drove away. For several seconds, none of the officers spoke. Then Briggs turned toward Hollister. "Turn your body camera off." Hollister reached up and pressed the button. The red recording light disappeared. Briggs folded his arms. "We're going to talk about this." Hollister looked frustrated. He was acting suspicious. Briggs immediately shook his head. "No, what you did was escalate a routine traffic stop." Hollister didn't respond. Briggs continued. "You ignored identification, you ordered a search without probable cause, and you nearly handcuffed a verified federal agent." Carver remained silent nearby. Briggs looked at him. "You too?" Carver nodded. "Yes, sir." Briggs turned back toward Hollister. "You know this entire interaction is on body camera." Hollister didn't answer. "And once that footage gets reviewed, there are going to be questions." The flashing patrol lights finally shut off one by one. The road returned to darkness. Within days, the body camera footage from the stop began circulating within the department. Internal affairs investigators reviewed the full recording, including the moment Hollister ignored Caldwell's credentials and escalated the stop. The investigation focused on several issues: failure to provide a lawful reason for the stop, unjustified detention, an unauthorized vehicle search, and the aggressive conduct displayed during the interaction. Officer Trent Hollister was placed on administrative leave while the review continued. For Darius Caldwell, the incident became another example of something he had experienced more than once in his career. Even as a federal agent, trained in law enforcement himself, he still found himself dealing with situations where assumptions were made before facts were checked. The difference this time was that everything had been recorded. Body camera footage doesn't rely on memory or opinion, it simply shows what happened. And in this case, it showed exactly how a routine traffic stop turned into something that should never have happened in the first place.
If this story made you think, make sure you subscribe to Culture Scope for more real stories exposing injustice and accountability. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below.